This week on Worldview, Prime Minister Modi heads to the United States. So what's on the agenda apart from the Quad Summit and UN meetings? And with just 7 weeks to go to American elections, who's better for ties with India, Trump or Harris? And will either of them get to meet Mr. Modi? Hello and welcome to Worldview at the Hindu with me, Suhasini Haidar. Now, certainly there's a lot to unpack this week, and the timing of Prime Minister Modi's visit to the United Nations really makes it that much more interesting. This is, in fact, the fourth time that Modi has traveled to the UN during what's called High Level Week or HLW after 2014, 2019 and 2021, although he will not address the UN General Assembly this year. So what can we expect in a 3-day visit? It's a packed agenda. The first, the Quad Summit with US President Biden, Japanese Prime Minister Kishida and Australian Prime Minister Albanese there in Wilmington, Delaware. The visit and the Quad Summit are really expected to be a warm send-off for two of the leaders who are retiring soon, Biden and Kishida, and Prime Minister Modi will also hold bilateral meetings with all of them before heading to New York. So what should you watch for? One, any statement by Prime Minister Modi on a possible role for India in Russia-Ukraine peacemaking, as well as watch the Quad joint statement, because the White House has said it's going to focus on China, but it remains to be seen what actually gets agreed on. Also, any kind of agreement on military or maritime partnerships involving the navies of the four countries, because remember, India has always been a bit hesitant on that. So on to New York, and the UN Summit of the Future is the other big highlight of the Prime Minister's visit. It's called the SOTF. It's an important initiative started by the UN Secretary General himself to consider just where all the future challenges are from, where the world body needs to improve, what kind of reforms it needs, and other issues. A pact of the future will be signed. What should you watch out for? Who will Prime Minister Modi meet on the sidelines of the UNGA as all these leaders come? At least 150 leaders are expected. Certainly Bangladesh, Ukraine, Israel, any leaders from those countries will be very important meetings and will be watched very closely. Also a possible meeting, although it's not outlooked right now, between the G4, Brazil, Germany, Japan and India will be significant when it comes to UN Security Council expansion. They have a joint proposal on that. The third big highlight, the diaspora event, and after 5 years, Prime Minister Modi is back with a massive diaspora event in a stadium in the US. Remember, 2019 was the last with the Howdy Modi event in Texas. This time the event is called Modi and US Progress Together. It's slightly personalized, not India and the US, for example, but it's meant as a rally for the diaspora with around 16,000 expected in the audience at the Nassau Coliseum just outside New York. What should you watch therefore? Will there be political messaging of the kind we saw in Texas with Prime Minister Modi more or less endorsing President Trump and saying Ab ki baar Trump Sarkar, although Mr. Trump did not win that election. Also the question about whether there'll be protests of the kind that Prime Minister Modi faced in 2019 and 2021 by other members of the diaspora outside the stadium. There's also the problematic case of the alleged Indian intelligence plot against diaspora Khalistan leader Panun. The Department of Justice trial in that case is now underway. But at the same New York court where that trial is going on, it has issued a summons in a civil case against NSA Doval, who will accompany Modi to the US. So it'll be important to watch what happens in that summons. 3 others have also been summoned. Fourth big highlight, meetings with business leaders. And according to the MEA's own schedule, Modi will focus on meetings with CEOs of companies at the cutting edge of artificial intelligence, semiconductors, quantum computing, biotechnology. You get the picture. So what should you watch out for? Which business leaders then will Prime Minister Modi meet? And all eyes, of course, will be on Tesla, X and Starlink owner Elon Musk. Of course, the meetings are always about investment and what they can bring for India. And the fifth, finally, given that the visit is so close to the elections, the question or the speculation whether the Prime Minister will meet either or both the presidential contenders, Donald Trump and Kamala Harris. At a campaign rally this week, here's what Trump said.
And Modi, you're fantastic. I mean, fantastic man. A lot of these leaders are fantastic. You have to understand one thing. They're 100%. These people are the sharpest people. they're not a little bit backward. They are at the top. You know the expression, they're at the top of their game, and they use it against us. But India is very tough. Brazil.
Vintage Trump there from his first presidency, it seems. But when asked about whether Mr. Modi is indeed meeting Mr. Trump and whether he will meet Ms. Harris as well, Foreign Secretary Vikram Misri said that no meetings had been fixed thus far, and you just have to wait to see.
Your question on the remarks that have been made by former President Trump and whether they will come up in a discussion, I think we first need to work our way through to fixing a meeting and then look at the issues.
Clearly, Trump either misspoke or spoke prematurely. But there is no doubting the kind of personal connection he does have with Prime Minister Modi. And then there is the relationship between Prime Minister Modi and Vice President Kamala Harris. So first, let's just take a look at where the race is actually going right now in the US. It's a dead heat. The latest New York Times polls say voters are tied at 47% each between Trump and Harris. In the average of polls, Kamala Harris is a little ahead, 2% ahead of Donald Trump. But remember, there are always margins over here. In the battleground map, however, which is important because that's how the president is chosen, Trump still has an edge. But after the first television debate between Trump and Harris, where she won by many accounts, Harris is certainly getting closer. It all really comes down to 7 swing states in the United States. They're called that: Arizona, Georgia, North Carolina, where Trump is ahead at present, and Michigan, Nevada, Pennsylvania, and Wisconsin, where Harris either leads or is tying close to Trump. So let's just ask that question: who's better for India-US ties? At an event with 3 former ambassadors, I asked former Foreign Secretary Shyam Saran that question.
There is such a density of bilateral relations now between India and the US, and very broad-ranging, that I think we will probably see a fair degree of continuity with respect to India-US relations. But there are uncertainties because the manner in which, say, Trump or Kamala Harris handled various regional conflicts like Ukraine or the Middle East, what is the kind of policies we may see with respect to China, because I do see that there is a certain kind of shift taking place in US-China relations, which, by the way, is the prism through which both the US and India look at each other. That's a very important aspect, that the cementing factor between India and the US, in a very real sense, has been a certain common perception of threat from China.
So it's all about the issues, and we can see, as I said, the personal bonhomie between Prime Minister Modi and President Trump far greater than that between Prime Minister Modi and Vice President Harris, despite Kamala Harris's Indian parentage. But take a look at the issues that might make a difference depending on who comes to power. The first is going to be trade between the two countries, of course, topping $200 billion. Trump actually slapped many tariffs on India. He also withdrew India's GSP status, so that's something to watch for. But he did try to negotiate a free trade agreement. That's not something Kamala Harris will be in favor of, and neither did the Biden administration go ahead with. But it did end all the WTO disputes with India, the tariffs, and it's likely to build on that. Trump will be protectionist, although Harris will perhaps make exceptions in that protectionism, whether it's the CHIPS Act or others, for national security reasons, in other words, China related. So let's get to the second point, China. Both candidates are expected to escalate the US-China rivalry, talk tough. However, Trump will be expecting more in return from India for any agreements where the US is assisting India. In fact, he will insist that India steps up to do more in the Quad as well as he has with other groupings that the US is involved in. Then we come to the Russia-Ukraine issue. A Harris administration will steer the course on Ukraine and may want to encourage India to get involved in peace efforts. That's going to be different with Trump. He's likely to want to effect the peace himself, and he will not put pressure on India to cut its ties with Russia or to cut oil imports from Russia. The fourth issue, climate change. A Harris administration will fund more renewable transitions for India, but then it'll expect more from India in terms of climate actions and climate goals. Whereas Trump is not going to be so worried about the climate goals. He may actually push India into buying more fossil fuels, US energy, and even complete that Tellurian LNG deal that was announced in 2019, but has never actually been done. A fifth issue, immigration. While both will probably clamp down on illegal immigration and increase deportation, Trump will likely cut down on immigration for professionals from India as well. He's done this in the past. His comments at the debate on just how he sees immigrants are the subject, of course, of memes. And finally, the issue of human rights. Harris will continue the Democrat messaging on human rights issues in India, especially as she is close to the progressives in the Democratic Party. Trump is not expected to take up human rights, NGOs, minority rights, or democratic decline issues at all if he is elected, and he didn't in the past as well. So what's Worldview's take? We have a very simple take this week. India and the United States share 25 years of year-on-year growth in ties. And while personal elections might differ at the leadership level, bilateral ties are set to be positive, no matter how negative and polarized the campaign in the US gets from this point on. I'm afraid we don't have much time, so I'm going to come back with book recommendations next week. You can always go to www.thehindu.com to look at previous editions of Worldview where we've discussed these issues, but we'll be back. Thanks for watching.